My name's Rob Collins. I'm the A&R and Marketing Director at Cooking Vinyl. And tonight we're going to be discussing the thorny subject of marketing and how effective it is, it isn't, it can or can't be in this ever-changing climate. The job of marketing an album, a track, a stream or even a playlist has become a more complex and kind of sophisticated process which will continue to evolve as we strive to find the best balance between old school traditional marketing of print and posters and radio ads and building our audiences online and via D2C and building those audiences pre-release, in advance of release, during release, and also in conjunction with the likes of our partners like Spotify and Apple and Amazon and HMV and a handful of other partners. Meanwhile, we're doing this while people move increasingly to consumption from ownership, and indeed people are actually doing both now. I know I do. So that's the kind of nub of what we're discussing tonight. So I'm going to hand you over to Tim, our moderator, who may introduce all of the panel. He may just kick off. I'll leave it up to you.
See, suspense is killing me. I think what I'm going to do is try and introduce people as I go in with the first dangerous questions. It is a wonderful turnout. Congratulations to Cooking Vinyl. Thanks to everyone for coming. It's either a very, very interesting topic or people are already bored of dry January and ready to get back on it. So, well done. First place to start, all of these discussions, these Cooking Vinyl, the future of discussions are, as the name suggests, forward-looking. We're trying to work out what's going to happen within a sector of the market over the next few years and decades. So it's good to get a picture of today, but if the panellists could bear in mind that we are also trying to get our crystal balls out and work out what the hell's going to go on with marketing now and in the future. I think a good place to start is with the album, because the focal point, traditionally, certainly in the music industry, of any marketing campaign would have been the album. That would have been the big release moment in an artist's cycle. Today, I'm not so sure whether that's true for every artist. Perhaps if I begin with John from Ignition Records at the end. Hello, John.
Hello.
John, I'd say if you could name some of the acts when you come to answer the question, but I'd say the acts that you work with are predominantly album acts, if we put them in that inverted commas.
Ignition, historically the home for Oasis, currently working with Noel Gallagher, but we also release records by The Coral, Primal Scream, Stereophonics, and they are album-selling artists at the moment, and I think they will remain that way for some time. I'm not in the business of crystal ball gazing, so I wouldn't like to say how long, but certainly it feels like the album is a relevant piece of music content for their fans.
And how nice to have you sat next to a representative from Sony Music when did the independent release Stereophonics album beat a Sony release?
It did, yeah. It was number 2 all week actually, and then on the chart on Friday it went in at number 1. It was great, yeah.
To talk about the fact that you are selling albums of you have many new artists working with Ignition, but you also work with these acts that have built their brands, built their careers, built their audiences, Stereophonics being a prime example. Is that always going to be a losing game for you? Are those numbers always going to diminish into the future?
Will album sales keep diminishing? Possibly the physical album sale will keep diminishing, yes, but I don't think you can look at it just purely in terms of a physical product anymore. You've got to look at everything else that you're doing now. So you'd have to look at your streaming numbers, your YouTube numbers, your Vivo numbers, all those other things now come into play. So you can't just look at the album as a physical format and say, that's how we measure our success. It isn't how we measure our success anymore. At Ignition, because we are a big management company as well as a record label, we also look at our live business as well. So it's about our live business and whether our artists are selling more tickets. So Stereophonics, for instance, I think it's a shame Universal aren't here as well. I could nail both of them, couldn't we? From releasing their last album on Universal to releasing their first album under Ignition, we managed to effectively double the sales of the record. But the band also went on to do an arena tour on that last album, which was something that they said to me they weren't sure they were going to be able to go and do again in the future. So I think that was fantastic for them. And clearly, as a touring band, touring artists, they make a lot of their revenue from their touring. So that was great for them too. So we consider all those factors in play.
And is the album still the focal point for you?
Is the album still? I think the album gives us something to focus on, yes, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. We work with all our artists throughout the year, so it's a 12-month campaign for us. Noel keeps me busy, mostly with his comments in public, shall we say, about other artists. Noel keeps me busy even when he's months away from going into the studio and months after he's released the record. So we always work with the artists throughout the period of duration of, people call it a downtime or something like that, don't they? But we tend to think that you've got to work with the artist all the time. You've got to keep on top of all the socials, and you've got to make it interesting and relevant for people. So yes, we do focus on the album. It's something that we can book a tour around, but also we talk to artists about putting off one-off singles, EPs, collaborations with other artists, etc., etc.
Fred, you look after, effectively, analysing the market, particularly the digital market for Sony, and working out clever times to spend money and clever times not to, I should imagine. How much does the album factor into that process for you, and is it doing less so as we move through the years?
Well, I suppose can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, hi. I think one of the things that we get confused about a lot is the album as a unit of commerce versus the album as a unit of art. And I suppose when someone makes an album that is a unit of art, then that is a core part of how you then build a campaign around it. And that's going to be dependent on the artist and also the type of audience that artist likes. So Stereophonics or Bring Me the Horizon, just to,
They both smash the libertines. They both smash the libertines, it's fine.
But the point is that I think we sometimes get carried away by all this talk about distribution and money and revenue. And at the heart of it, it is whatever the unit of art that the artist wants to connect with the fan base. So if that's an album, then that's the starting point. If it's an album to justify a tour, then that's another starting point. If it's a number of streamed tracks to then build a brand partnership and sell merchandise, then that's another thing. And I think for me, that's what's important. So the way that we will look at it is on a case-by-case basis, and we will look at what the artist is trying to do and what they want to do and what they want to achieve and who their fans are and whether those are people that indeed are consuming albums, and then try and find some kind of middle ground. But obviously, we're a record company. The clue is still in the name. So obviously, as long as we sign people to album deals, and we don't exclusively do that, we also have, same as you, singles and all sorts of things. We're experimenting with different formats. But if the album is the relevant unit of art, then that should be the starting point for building commerce.
I suppose I'll phrase the question a slightly different way, but have you seen more attention going on singles and tracks in your business over the past few years in the age of streaming as we become, I suppose, a track-led consumption pattern?
I think it's certainly we've diversified into that. That was an area that wasn't, streaming has made that a viable business. And a lot of the time it is how many singles connect and then become an album proposition. There's still an element of that way of thinking. So I suppose in that regard, the album still occupies quite a significant share of our mind ultimately, but the way in is not necessarily always through an album deal. So there is a lot more kind of experimentation, picking things up, seeing if they work. We are in a market, in a streaming world where you get back what you put in, so you can listen to things and see what you do, which makes you more reactive. But then the question is, do you stick around long enough in some cases? So that's a debate. But we're doing a little bit more of that kind of stuff as well. But ultimately, if you see a channel that says we're going to make money out of an album, that is still a kind of a core part of how our business model is structured.
Darren, Motive Unknown, I suppose I could predominantly call you a digital marketing agency. You work with labels and I suppose direct with artists and management companies too. What are you noticing that these clients want to achieve? What is it that they want your help with? Is it ultimately we want the album sales number at the end to be bigger, or is it a more holistic picture?
I think it's largely, depending on where we're employed, they want more money depending on what their interests are. So if we're employed by a label, obviously they want more album sales, but if we're employed direct by managers, then they want more money across the board. And it's interesting how that colours the conversation in the sense that, I think increasingly there's a case for agencies like Motive Unknown working more closely with management companies maybe because you can affect change across a bigger picture, and our belief that there's a great amount of data that artists can hold and leverage directly. As far as we're concerned, we feel that that's applicable across everything. So to be working within a silo of a label focusing on an album when there's an enormous amount of money to be made from live and merchandising. And, you know, I think in the music business we get very hooked on kind of this over here and that over there and that over there. And really there's only, you know, a guy or girl or band or whatever making music and a fan consuming things around the ripple effect thereof. So within what we're doing, I mean, you know, I keep rolling out the same kind of phrase really, which is just that as we see it, there's only popular culture and where you sit within that. You know, and so artists we work with can be big for having, you know, a massive track. So Snake Hips at Columbia, huge song, flying away at the moment, and it's all about the song. But equally, you know, bands like Run the Jewels that we look after, there's a much bigger picture there where we're getting involved in marketing, you know, around what Killer Mike's doing with Bernie Sanders. It's you know, their view is very much where you're reporting in at that level, that this is about keeping the band as a current proposition within popular culture, and therefore, if that means you're giving it a push around Bernie Sanders' electoral chances and Killer Mike supporting that, if that draws more people back to investigate who Run the Jewels are, then that's a net win.
Not to give away any trade secrets, but perhaps a pearl of wisdom. Do you see any areas that the music business is wasting its money currently?
Yeah, on advertising and possibly social media managers. I don't like social media particularly. I feel that social media is advertising with a sort of free element that people get bought into. And I should caveat this by saying there's always bands that are great on social media. We work with some, they're fantastic, and that's great. So they get a lot of free reach and everything else. But outside of that, I think the reality that people get hoodwinked on is that a lot of the social networks are actually, you know, they're all ad networks, or they're all aspiring ad networks, whether they are one yet or not. And actually, when you pay, you get so much more out of it. And so as a result, you know, we tend to focus more on that paid element because it can give you even insight as to what works and what doesn't work. But generally, I just feel that there's an inefficiency around advertising in which a sort of box-ticking process has been allowed to linger for too long, and that actually people could do this in a much smarter manner. You know, it's not a criticism of ad agencies, I hasten to add. It's a criticism of marketing managers and that side of things.
I'm glad your criticism is specific.
Especially with Gareth sitting there.
Yeah, I mean,
We'll get
no,
there.
it's, you know, it's just a belief that, you know, there's.
labels as well, then, eh?
I'm picking fights with fucking everyone.
Yeah.
So, you know.
It was that gin and tonic, wasn't it?
I know.
It was the
You didn't
gin
buy
and
me enough
tonic.
gin.
The point is
No,
that it's right. Darren's trying to help us spend our money more wisely.
Yeah, I just feel quite strongly that there's too much, you know, there's an inefficiency there, and, you know, it could be spent much more wisely. And at a point when, you know, there's still a squeeze generally, and particularly on the indie sector, the budgets are still shrinking. You know, there's a need to be wiser about how you spend the money. And I feel that, you know, that's one area where money could be spent more wisely.
I'll come back to how later. Rob, feeling the squeeze as a label?
Very much,
I'm sure you have over the last 15 years or so. What lessons have you learned? How are you spending your money more wisely as a label?
I think we spend quite a lot of money in the pre-release stage. We actually try and build the audience, target the audience, get those D2C orders going, find out who we're actually going to sell to, so we know we're, you know, we've picking up 50-60% of the sales in the first week, which gives us the confidence then to predict where the record's going to go in the charts. We figure out how we're going to work out with the media through that, and then it just helps us plan the next 4 weeks and then the next 4 weeks after that. We then look at how each track does, whether it's reacting at radio, whether it's reacting on Spotify, or whether the band have got a tour, and we roll out, you know, incremental spends as per the campaign rolls on. You know, we don't set off with saying we have to spend so much money on a project. It's very much managed on a stage-by-stage basis, and I'll admit, if things get a bit tricky, we'll pull back. Yeah. But if they're going really well, we can turn the tap on and find a lot more money and turn something into a success.
And do you find there's less focus on, I suppose, what would have been the day one rush you know, 15, 20 years ago, particularly where there was a focus on the album release day, all of the budget would have been held back for the week before to try and drive sales. Do you actually spend your money over a longer period of time now?
If it's there, yeah. I mean, we can spend the money if there's something to spend it on, if there's a reason. Otherwise, there's no point spending the money. You're just wasting the money, you know, and that's what a lot of people still do. They have a budget set by the marketing director and they spend the money, and a lot of bands get a lot of false views, and, you know, their position in the media is a lot higher than it actually should be because they've had so much money spent on them, and it's just unreal. You know, it just doesn't drive the business properly.
Gareth, I don't want to position Seven Stars as a traditional agency. That would be an obvious thing to do. But you've been working with traditional media for a long time. How do you see the value of traditional media for let's say, a breaking artist today versus particularly social media or digital channels?
I think traditional media doesn't really exist as a concept now. Everything's becoming digital anyway. I think the point Darren made about box ticking, that there's some validity, and I know where that's coming from. That, you know, that there was a pretty linear relationship between whatever the push was, whether it was advertising or above the line marketing, whatever, and sales, and that could be measured. And to be honest, in the old age, the degree of wastage, you could get away with that now. And that box ticking exercise is frustrating because everyone kind of knew that there was an element that wasn't probably worth doing, but let's just get it out there and avoid the risk of not getting it right. What's really interesting now, and what we're trying to teach all of the people we've got working in our teams, is that there are just so many different data points coming in now, and so many different ways that things work, and they work differently at different times. So, you know, at different points of consumption across the day, different consumers are consuming the same music in a different way. What we need to do is pull all those data points together and find out which are most effective and when they're most effective, and not be doing the same thing across a period of time, but just get it right when it's right, and then you can build it much more successfully. And that's making our job more interesting as well.
And what about the world of TV, magazines, postering? Does that still hold some weight in this world, or is it only for those real blockbuster artists?
I think the economics mean that TV is much more, in terms of advertising, for the blockbuster artists. Although you can, if you really, really fine-tune, you can tweak things. And you look at a lot of the albums that become blockbusters over a long period of time. 52-week advertising campaigns on TV, where they're actually just spending very small amounts of money each week to sustain it as part of a programme. It can still work. The old traditional media mix, I think it varies, you know, for artists or album or tour. So, if, you know, for live, print has still got a place. Print as a notice board, and then online is where you go and execute. Whereas I think just for album sales, you know, heavy consumers of music, they've moved. Early adopters were streaming, so then they're less looking for print cues as to consume their music. So I think it depends on what you're looking at.
Jeff, hello. We're going to talk, and we already talked a lot about the influence of streaming and playlists, etc. It's worth saying that radio remains the medium by which most people discover new artists. If people haven't seen the radars, Six Music, very cursory glance across the room would suggest that a number of people are reliant on that for their business. Six Music is booming, 2.2 million in the latest radars. Can we have a round of applause just for Six Music, please? Now I'm going to ask a far darker question. Okay. Pretty much everyone on this panel, aside from your good self, is trying to game marketing to a certain degree, whether it be to the consumer or whether it's to be to other people in the industry.
Yes.
One of the objectives of that game will be to get those social media figures, to get those YouTube views, to get those playlist positions and those playlist numbers up. To what degree do you allow yourself to be influenced by the data that comes in if they do their job well?
Yeah. Very little, I think, at Radio 2 and Six Music. And I don't think that I could speak for all radio in that way. I'm sure the radio stations will work in different directions. And I think we talked beforehand about, you know, how, it depends on the demographic you're probably talking to or playing music to. But I certainly think with our audiences, which are primarily over 35, we don't, overly concern ourselves with that. I think part of it is because we are designed to be, or certainly Six Music, as we talked about, is designed to be a primary curatorial outlet, and we really do build our service based on the authorship of our presenters. I mean, it's supported by what we do with our programming and all that side of things, but, it's clearly about having those great personalities and presenters and their choice of music. So I would say that it doesn't really affect them too much, and it certainly doesn't affect us in terms of the music team choosing those records that go on to the most played records of the week, the playlist records. And I think that stretches across to Radio 2. As I say, I know other stations where there's a lot more put in about plots and what's happening on Spotify and what's happening on YouTube, but even there, I question whether we need that amount of diligence to look at all this data, because I still think that in the end of it, radio tends to be a song-by-song medium, and I buy what Fred says about the unit of art. I think there's still something to be said for a body of work in an album, but still for radio, it's a song-by-song basis. And I think, with the team composed at our radio stations of the presenters and experienced producers, I think that's the way to define what songs work best for us. So I would say that we don't get overly involved in that, but I personally will look at some things. I will take some data on board. I'd look at Spotify numbers and things like that. But when we go into a room to decide what the records are, I won't colour the picture too much with that extra information. I just don't think it's needed.
If we take the idea that marketing doesn't necessarily have to have money behind it, I suppose, you can influence people in other ways. And then we take a look at what services such as Spotify and Apple Music are doing. I think I'm justified in asking the question that when Spotify creates a playlist or a playlist brand, or a label indeed creates a playlist brand, that encroaches onto Six's territory musically. Do you feel threatened by that? I mean, it's been a number of years now that you've experienced that, so, and you seem to be, the station seems to be growing year on year.
It's interesting because we were the first station to have a playlister of our playlist, basically, and we kind of created that for that purpose. There was a lot of debate at the BBC. I think Radio 1 were a little bit worried about it. They thought it would take away from their listenership. I was very adamant at Six Music that the strength was in our personalities and our curatorial and what the people do in between the records there. And actually, it's only the new release players we put on our playlist anyway. So within the realm of what we play, from the core gold stuff through to the new stuff, I wasn't actually scared of actually putting all our playlist up there. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Is that the sort of thing? So we've actually kind of been through that whole process. Then Radio 1 came on. Now, Radio 1 have got a massive following, I think, on Spotify in terms of their playlist. But funny enough, before we did the Six Music playlist, somebody had set up their own Six Music playlist and had a massive number of kind of users. I mean, ultimately, that's kind of moved away. But I thought it was very entrepreneurial and good that they provided that service. And we didn't get in the way, that we just set up our own. And I think we picked up a few, but that's still going as well. But I think it wasn't a scary thing. We weren't scared of doing that. But as I say, I could understand why some services might be.
And this trend of streaming services using artists to curate and present, where did they get that idea from?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, exactly. Who'd have thought?
John, it's a terrible thing as a moderator to do, to dredge up an anecdote I've already heard in the past, but I was wondering if you could share this with the group, because I thought it's wonderful. It's nothing to do with your stag weekend or anything like that. John previously worked at a major label, right? At Polydor, particularly held a high-up marketing position in that building, worked with Lady Gaga and others. You've regaled me previously with watching the rise of Arctic Monkeys and the Kooks at the same time, and how the Kooks were over-marketed in an era where there was actually less channels to market them. So I was wondering, first and foremost, if you could just tell us about how you watched those two bands and how one was, the public was bombarded with one.
Well, actually, that was when I was at EMI, so when Virgin were part of the EMI group, and yeah, I think both records have ended up selling, well, the last time I looked, which is a while ago now, but I think both records ended up selling a similar amount on their debut albums, 1.2, 1.3 million. I'm sure it's north of that now. But funny enough, I talked at the time, it wasn't Gareth's company that were running the advertising for Virgin. It was a different company, and I had a conversation with a senior member of the advertising team who worked on the Virgin account. And one of them was saying to me that he actually was in meetings with the record labels saying, I really wish we could stop the advertising on the Kooks record, because I really feel that although you're delivering a result, you're marketing and advertising a record which is priced at £5 in the supermarkets because it had been out for perhaps 9 months, and that was the price that the market would bear at that point. And he said, I really don't think you're converting people into fans of the Kooks. What I think you're doing is you're just convincing someone to drop a £5 album into a shopping basket on a Saturday and it's not really for the benefit of the band in the long run. And maybe because of the strength of the second records, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the second Kooks album, I'm afraid. But perhaps because of the strength of the record, that's why they died away. But I also think it was over-marketed at that point. And there was something that was quite cool about Arctic Monkeys. I worked at Domino as well. And they wouldn't actually let you TV advertise their records, the Arctic Monkeys. And one of the reasons they wouldn't was because they just felt it wasn't cool. And they didn't want people to see a TV advert in, I don't know, the centre break of Coronation Street and take the piss out of them. If you talk to Ian McAndrew, who manages the band, still does manage the band, that was one of the reasons. And I had a conversation with Ian regarding the first Last Shadow Puppets record. And I said to Ian, you know, would you like to consider TV advertising the Last Shadow Puppets? And we thought about it, and I presented some numbers to him, and he said, yeah, you know what? I really think that we will sell more records if we TV advertise, but we just don't want to. And we never did. And they've come back now. I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of eagerness and awareness for their new album, and I think that's probably served them in good stead, actually.
So sometimes as a marketeer, you have to...
Less is definitely more.
Yeah.
Less is definitely more. Picking up on some of the things that people have already said, is what Radio 2 and 6 Music do for us, is that marketing or is that promotion? Is that PR? Because I would actually argue that, in a way, very few artists are marketed. If you talk to an FMCG marketing company, Coca-Cola, I don't know, ITV, Sky, somebody like that, would they recognise what the vast majority of the music industry does with its releases as marketing? I don't know if they actually would. As Darren was saying, I think one of the reasons that social is so popular is because it's cheap and it's free. You actually don't have to spend any money on it. You don't have to spend money to create a Facebook page, and you can, with clever use of video, songs, news, build up an audience. How many of your audience will actually, how many of your page likes will go out and buy your record? I don't know. But I would argue that quite a lot of what Radio 2 support for Stereophonics is that marketing. I think that's probably promotion and PR. Yeah.
It's a difficult one, I suppose, Fred. What we're talking about really is the difference between using marketing or PR to accrue a fan, or to generate a fan, or to generate a sale. And those are two distinct notions that must be difficult.
I mean, I think one of the challenges that the business has faced, which was a nice linear kind of nice industrial model. Someone made a record, handed it to a promo team, got it on the radio. Then it went to a marketing team who said it was out now. The sales team got it on the shelf of a shop and repeat. And now, what is Spotify, what is iTunes, what is radio? Everything is a blend of a retailer, a promotional channel, a marketing platform. So really, it's more about building an engaged fan base, to use all the jargon in one fell swoop. Because once you've got a bunch of people who give a fuck, let's put it in normal English, then you're more likely to get them to part with cash at some point. And weirdly, we've never, I would argue, never really done marketing. And it's interesting because if you just look at the semantics of some of the people's titles in record labels, big and small, they're still called product managers. And that product is an album, which was premised on a 6 to 8 week pre-release window. You pulled back an elastic as far as you could, and then you let it fly and tried to manage decline as gracefully as possible. Now, it's on air, on sale. You put it out and you start building, so it really has to be a conversation about fans, which then means we have to start doing marketing, actual marketing, as opposed to product launch marketing, which is still marketing, but it's different. And if you were to speak it to people well, since we're sitting in Adland, the same problem afflicts people trying to sell dishwashing soap, which is, think how shit their job is. I got to get someone to like my dishwasher on Facebook. At least we're dealing with the Arctic Monkeys. So that sucks, right? And they're grappling with the same problems, and their media agencies and their ad agencies. So, a lot of it is about, we used to say, we want the product to peak here, so we're working backwards from a release date, so we need these things to happen. Whereas now we're planning by audience. We're saying, this is, I know it sounds depressing when you're referring to music, but it's 18 to 24-year-old female casual consumers of music here, so that's what I'm doing. And I'm using a mix of owned content, like stuff that I make, putting some paid media around it. So what is promo, what is marketing? It's all the same thing now, depending on which audience, because for some audiences, you still just pull back the elastic and go. So that's where we are, and I think part of the problem is we get hung up on what we mean by marketing, and actually what we mean is pre-release product launch marketing, as opposed to building fan base engagement and then, selling them stuff marketing.
I see John quizzically raising his microphone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're in danger, aren't we, when we talk about the music market as considering it all as a homogenous thing, because there are so many different artists, there are so many different consumers, they all behave in different ways. I mean, one example, Iron Maiden, you know, when I worked at EMI, we worked with Iron Maiden, and this is no disrespect to Iron Maiden, because I think they're a fantastic band, but, you know, we used to say it was almost like you could mail the CD or the vinyl to the people who would buy that record in week one, because their sales do drop off quite dramatically in week two. They've got a very loyal fan base, and they want a record in week one. There's no disrespect in doing it that way, but you're not going to be looking at an Iron Maiden campaign thinking about what you can sell to a wider audience 6 months, 8 months after that album's come out. So I think you've always got to cut it in different ways. The bigger artist releases that the music industry released, the Adele record, or as Gareth alluded to, some of those campaigns that work over a long period of time, like perhaps Jess Glynn. I think you've been working on that on Atlantic, haven't you? They're marketing campaigns because they're people who are segmenting the audience, they're looking at the age, they're looking at the geographic spread. All those different ways a marketeer would say that's how you segment the audience. That's done. But for a record that you think you might sell 10,000 copies of over 12 months, I don't think that really touches the sides of traditional marketing. I think that's someone who looks to do something clever with social media, with an online property, to extend the reach of a video, or to do something unusual on a live touring scenario. So I think you've got to make that distinction.
Just to pick up on that, the Jess Glynn one, and that campaign has been successful. It's far exceeded sales projections, but that wasn't a given that the album was going to succeed. It's got all those hit singles on it, and what John's talking about is joining those dots across the piece. But you know, Jess was the voice of quite a lot of singles that people didn't know she was singing on them. So there was a lot of work and a lot of research done, which then translated into a paid media campaign that joined all those dots together, and that did work. So there is a role for that traditional advertising approach.
There's a level of ambition. I think John was saying 10,000 albums in 12 months. If you run a business of a certain level of resource, that could be a profitable project. But with Jess Glynn, that's got to be gold or platinum or bust, isn't it? Before she's dropped, Rob said. Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, it's a numbers game. You know, whatever the figure is, 1 out of 20
It has
makes
to be successful. You know, they have to make it successful.
Um,
I'd ask you, do you know if the spend equates to the sales? Is it like way out of proportion, or do you think it's in line with a per unit spend that you're used to spending?
It was done efficiently, certainly. I mean, part of the way that's done is we work very. Pardon? There's no Chatham House rules tonight. We work very, very closely with the label, with all of our labels, but to literally like gauge what sales are going to be from week to week to week, and what a long-term projection is, and we've done this with Rob on other releases and John, and then you kind of know exactly what's working and exactly what's not working, but you do have a goal. So and you vary the advertising mix to make sure that you're achieving that goal. And it is going to be a different audience with different singles. This one is maybe a more Radio 2 single, this one's more of a Radio 1 single. And you map everything out, and it's all about fine detail. And that's another reason why I said earlier, it's actually getting more and more interesting, because there's so many more data points coming back to us that we can see and with the label, work out what buttons to press and when to press them. Whereas before it was pretty much a scattergun approach. Not particularly fulfilling from our point of view in terms of your day job. It's much more interesting now.
Darren, what data points do you find useful or meaningful in a world where you're drowned in them every day, I'm sure, from various online platforms? Which are the ones that actually matter?
It totally varies. I mean, I think there's a fascination and near obsession with data, and the issue's not the data; it's filtering it to the stuff that actually means anything. And so we can all, dive into a swimming pool full of data and promptly drown. But I'd rather reduce it to a more meaningful, gin-sized
a puddle of data.
Puddle, that means more. I mean, I've got to be honest. I think I'm a contrarian in that, Motive Unknown is a digital agency, but often when you're working with an artist, it's, I'm still a fan of just fucking stand up and look around. If we can sit here and go, we're doing really well with this and we're doing really well with that, but if you're aiming at kids who are 16 to 25 and then you go and stand in a pub or school playground and no one is talking about your artist or anything else, then you're not cutting through yet. And so, half of what we do, I guess, there's a definite sort of exploratory thing in that I do like social media ad platforms now as a means to gauge what kind of response you're getting and learn where your audiences are and things like that. But often the data discussion is, it's interesting because I think everyone looks at data, but data tells a different story depending on the platform. Spotify can sit there and say to you, oh, all your listeners for this artist are sort of blah and over 25 or whatever. But, 2 years ago, that just reflected who used Spotify, not really necessarily who your artists were. And if you went and looked at the same artist on SoundCloud, skew a lot younger, or YouTube skew a lot younger. So, there's all these different things and they tell very different stories. And so there's no one answer for us. It depends on the artist. We try and figure out what we can. But there's a definite sense of, with every campaign at the start, sitting down and trying to figure out who our audience is. Because I have to be honest, if you need me to give you a bunch of data to tell you who the potential buyers are, you've probably made a grievous error on your A&R. You need to know what you've signed the band for, who are you aiming at. If you've just picked it up and gone, don't know, mate, it's over to you, then kiss that budget goodbye.
I was actually going to... There is a question down here. To what extent does marketing in the modern age lead A&R? I'm going to rewind back to Fred and then come to Rob. What do you think, Fred? In an organisation like yours where marketing and A&R is so tied together under one roof, who's leading who?
I think it... Well, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of the primacy of shaman. It's difficult. It's difficult which doctor is more powerful. But I would say that it's much more equal. And I think that is because at the point of signing, there's a far greater need for those two planets to align, to Darren's point, which is there needs to be a powerful reason why, which is often the instinctive, just because the sound is... But then it has to be workable and marketable by the organization. So increasingly that feels like, if you take the leadership model where you have in Columbia, for example, Alison Donnell and Mark Terry working together, you've got marketing and A&R like sort of joined at the hip at the leadership level of the label, so decisions are taken jointly. And I think that makes sense because if it's true that you're positioning the artist as a brand, and I don't really like using that word, but if people will forgive me for using it, then you need the creative and musical vision. Obviously the artist is core to everything, but the creative vision of where the music is going and the marketing to work hand in hand. Because you can't then down the line bullshit a bullshitter, and that's certainly what social media has laid bare for people.
Rob, slow question to you. Who holds the keys, do you reckon, these days?
Him over there.
Yes, that's true. If you have a figurehead, I suppose. But
predominantly the artists we release are more fan-based artists. So yes, the marketability of that artist does come into our decision-making process. We can't invest in 10 projects and only one is successful. We have to make 8 or 9 of those projects successful. So we do look at the numbers in great detail. There was one band we were talking to recently. We've actually lost the deal because we were outbid massively, but we sent them the spreadsheet that we actually work on and we put all our deals together, and they came back to us and said it's the most amazing spreadsheet they've ever seen. They've never seen anyone put so much detail and care and attention into a presentation and a proposal, and they really appreciated seeing the numbers in sort of real numbers. They'd never ever seen them before. They didn't know what they earned from all these different territories. So I think it helps us explain what we're about to our artists by being transparent with the numbers. But ultimately, it's about us loving the music as well. We don't do anything if we're not feeling passionate about it. And it doesn't have to be the whole company, just someone in the company brings it in. They want to do it. We look at it on an A&R basis, on a commercial basis. And if the two align, as Fred said, if the planets align, then we try and get the deal.
And just to go back to a point that you raised earlier, are you left scratching your head slightly sometimes at the amount of money that's being spent on marketing at...
I'm left scratching my head about the amount of money that's paid for bands still. Yeah, definitely.
Because I suppose the idea is, what is a victory? What is a victory for a marketeer or an A&R? If they get to a gold record, but they've spent $1 million plus in the process,
Exactly.
Gareth, that's something I'd sort of wanted to touch with you on. Rob did mention it before, but does it ever bemuse you slightly that there must be so many campaigns you work on that the artist doesn't quite get to where the record label wants them to?
In what way?
Well, in that you're spending someone else's money, I suppose.
Oh no, I've worked in sort of music for quite a long time. I was at a one of the big network advertising agencies, which is not as much fun as being independent and doing it yourself. I can tell you that. But whenever I've been doing that, the one thing I've always learned to say is when to say you shouldn't spend. It's not going to work. It's not right. And I think as they're our clients, the labels are our clients. They respect you far more when you sort of say, I can't see that this would work. I mean, there's a commission model that flies around in advertising, which isn't necessarily the right thing at all times. But if you're making a proposal that means that agency is going to earn more money because you've said to spend more money, that's wrong, isn't it? So you've got to be very, very, very upfront and say, look, if it's not right, don't do it. I think that's important.
And do you, even in Adland, I suppose, recognise any ingredients in artists that the artist campaigns that come to you and you think this is a winner from the off? This has got a real chance of being a platinum seller, selling out the O2, whatever that aim of the label or management is. Are there certain characteristics or things in their career?
I mean, at that level, I think, to be honest, by the time we get involved, we're a little bit further. It's a little bit further along the evolution, and those kind of things will probably been a bit clearer before. Unfortunately, be much more exciting before we're getting involved. I mean, I have been played stuff, over the years when you've gone, well, that's definitely something different, something special. But no, we're not quite as early as that.
Jeff, is there? You hold a heck of a lot of power. All of this money and effort, and social media managers can throw everything at an artist. But if you're not going to put it on your B list, then it's all for nothing, really. Yeah. I mean, how do you deal with that weight of pressure? Like a whole industry throwing all that money, and you're the guy who gets to say yes or no.
I mean, I think a lot of it is being really transparent and straightforward about what we do. I think that's often been the tried and tested approach that I've tried to have with labels. I mean, and it shouldn't really have any factor on us. But and I'd be naive in sort of saying that it doesn't completely, because clearly we're going to be affected by some things. But in the end of it, if the acid test is about the song, that's the important thing. But I was taken by what we were just sort of saying before about marketing. I think one of the end results of marketing for us that we do feel is the impact date. And the impact date is a really interesting thing because it tends to be becoming a really weirder and weirder thing. Because we're finding at our end with radio that this date is obviously predicated by marketing. And of course, we're not about marketing, we're about playing songs to an audience. And sometimes we'll get a record and it's got a date on it and then it'll kind of move. And you're kind of, well, why is it moving? It's because, well, there's something going to happen, whether it be TV or whether it's another radio station or whatever. And you kind of think, well, how long can we go through this merry dance? And I think we're getting to the point, I think, certainly in our stations, where we're looking at that and thinking, we've got to analyse that again. We don't want to mess with our relationships. I think it's important that we have a good relationship with the music industry, but people shouldn't mess with us too much, because I think, and I know there's a greater goal out there, but I was going to say, and I think it's a useful forum to say this, that is a big factor now that we're looking at, that impact dates are moving around. And it's more of the issue of, like, not the global release date thing with the big artist. It's about second, third tracks of albums and things like that. It's kind of like, well, those albums are out there, how do we make it work? But we're waiting for some kind of marketing thing to hit before we hit it to our 3 weeks ahead for our audience, you know what I mean? So
this is the paradoxical world where the track exists. You can sit in front of a computer and play it right there, but for some reason you're not allowed to play it, even though there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah, and so we're kind of saying, well, this is crazy, because really, there's an element of kind of like honesty with the audience. You're sort of saying, well, why are we not doing it? Why are we not playing it? Why are we waiting so long to play it? And we get it. Often there's a mix, there's an edit, there's a different version that you want to play. There's all sorts of things around it. But it's as time goes by and as we evolve into the future, I'm kind of thinking we've probably got to look at that. Maybe we've got to do the impact date. Maybe radio should come to the industry with an impact date.
Well, one thing that's always interested me about radio, actually, and you might be able to clear this up for me, is, let's say Adele releases her 4th album, for the sake of argument, and whoever she signed to directly, XL Beggars or Columbia or whoever, at that stage, say, oh, this is the 2nd single. Can't you go, no, it's not. Track 8's better than that. We're going to play track 8. Does that ever come up?
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think I'm loath to, whatever size of artist, to try and tell people what the next record is. I'm not doing A&R in that kind of like way. It's for the industry and the record label and the artist to decide where they come to us with it. But you're right. I mean, we could sort of do that, and that's to my point about the impact date. In a sense, we maybe have to be a little bit more proactive in that way to kind of set. And also, there's no reason why, say, with an Adele record, that we should go with the track they want to go. We could go with a track which maybe we think is more suitable to Radio 2, say, and Radio 1 could go with a different one. And actually, with somebody the size of Adele, it doesn't really matter, really, does it? I think in the end, in the wider range of things. But we know also that there's a world of video to take on account, and we know that impacts on our audience. So we know that our audience don't just sit within Radio 2 or within 6 Music, they're consuming the world of music. So we're trying to be responsible to that as well.
But also on that point, and quickly, just so we can really nail what you're trying to say, does YouTube come into this conversation where people are saying you should play this track on this day and it has to be this version, and you're seeing those counts fly up?
Yeah, I mean, there's a degree of that. I mean, it's quite interesting, and I'm just trying to think where I'm going to go here, but it's kind of like, with like the number one record this week is Lucas Graham's 7 Years, and that was around, I think, in Denmark probably middle of last year, was it? Probably beyond that, whatever. We kind of like picked it up because we know I'd heard it and come across it, and I'd seen a bit of it on Spotify and that sort of thing. And it just seemed to us, we were the first radio station to play it in the UK in January. And we played it the most, and it's number one. But it's kind of like, at what point do we kind of like get on these sort of like records? I'm very interested in those records that are coming not from the UK, but that we're seeing in the wider like world. And when do we? Rachel Platten did it a little bit with her record and that sort of thing. And there are certain records. Zara Larson's quite a big record out in the States at the moment. These things are impacting Spotify. What are we waiting for?
Yeah, I remember being in New York last year, and I'm terrible if I get a name wrong. Alicia Cara. And here. And I heard it in the back of a cab. It's got that Isaac Hayes sample on it, and I thought, wow, that's an amazing song.
Yeah.
How have I never heard that?
I know.
And then I came back home, and it was technically available from like May last year, but to be fair, it was only when Virgin EMI wanted the public to wake up to it that they did wake up to it, and it's now flown. So, I mean, marketing does work.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of kind of like, people are waiting, I think, and major labels will wait, obviously, because they've got a plan whereby an artist will come into the country and kind of like doing it. But I do think now with the way that music and services are going more and more global, that certainly this comes back to the heart of the global release date thing, doesn't it, as well? But also says, we've got to really be global. I think, we've all got to think more globally. And that actually might help us with things. It's not going to help you with localised PR in your country and that sort of side of things. But I think in a world where you better consume Lucas Graham back in June last year, and it's now a hit here in January, February, it's odd that kind of the lag is interesting. And as I say, I don't think it really overly impacts on our audiences when you're at Radio 2 and 6 Music. They're not jumping at these sort of things. But if you're at Radio 1 and Capital, I think you've got to be looking at, you want to stay ahead of the trend or whatever, Yeah.
I mean, the same thing happens in journalism. People still talk about, that's a territory-specific online exclusive. The World Wide Web, www, it's right there in the title.
It seems crazy.
One thing that I did want to touch on, and I reckon we've got about 5 to 8 minutes to delve into this, so good luck with that. Playlists are becoming ever more influential, streaming playlists. John, can money affect your chances of getting in those playlists? Should it, and will it?
Yes, no, yes.
Done. Let's go to the bar.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've all seen what's happened with the major labels buying services that were pre-existing and were successful on the streaming services, and I think that could effectively shut out the independent sector. If we're not careful, the independent sector are trying to aggregate what they do to get something to rival that in terms of the weight and the number of streams and the attraction that they can get from public who use, say, Spotify, Apple Music. I think, to be fair to all the partners that we deal with, Spotify, Apple Music, etc., they all seem to be pretty agnostic. They do seem to A&R it in a way that Jeff would A&R it, and they will respond positively to something they think is a great song and something that will work for their audience, so that's to their credit. But I do worry about that, and I think that's the reason why you've heard a lot of independents talking about this in the last 6 to 12 months. And you never asked me, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think the major labels are run by A&R people. I think that's borne out by the people who are at the top of those companies, with a few notable exceptions. Mark, as he was mentioned, I think Ted Cockle probably doesn't come from an A&R background, does he? But for the most part, I think the majors are run by A&R people. think that might be the problem they've got at the moment in terms of why they're not being as successful as they are. So I think a lot of those people have been around for a long time, actually, and they're not as successful as they perhaps could be. And it's the credit of people like Jeff and Six Music that we've got a vibrant music industry outside of some of that mainstream commercial radio, because I think there tends to be a cyclical thing where we just played the same thing over and over and over again by a lot of artists who won't be here in 5 years' time because they're not good enough. I think that's why Adele's successcul as well. So I'm just going off on a rant now, aren't I?
I think I speak for everyone when I say keep it up.
I think the reason Adele cuts through, she doesn't do a lot online, she doesn't do a lot on social. I don't think they probably didn't spend a lot of money to market that record, but I think, tell you what, I think the great British public can hear a great singer and can hear a great song, and I think that's why it's universally popular and has been so successful. And I think a lot of the music industry tries to sell a lot of shit, actually, to people, and I think they can see through that now. And I think the experience of several years of the X Factor, people have got used to that now. And I think that's beginning to be seen in the end result of those programmes not being as popular as they once were. So there you go.
I think Noel's rubbed off on you.
Yeah,
definitely.
I was going to say, if it's okay with the other panellists, I want to dig into this slightly more. I wanted to ask, so what are you saying that the majors should be run by younger A&R people? Or are you saying they should be run by marketing people? I misunderstood.
I'm not saying either of those things. I'm just saying that the major labels are run by A&R people. They've been run by the same A&R people predominantly for quite a long time now. I think the output of the major labels, historically, if you look back over the last 20 or 30 years, I think we're at a bit of a low, actually, creatively. Fred's point to start off with, it's all about the art, isn't it? That's why I'm in the music industry. I'm not in the music industry to sell a lot of records, but I think at the moment the art is taking second place, actually. I think we talked previously about when things are successful, how they're measured to be successful. I think a lot of it is a lot of stuff is thrown at the wall, and I think a lot of people just throw it at the wall and see if it's successful, and if it isn't, they move away very quickly now. It's a very ruthless business in the major labels, and I can talk as someone who's worked at both, actually, and I think they move away very, very quickly. I don't think they're in the business long term. I think, as Rob mentioned, sometimes some of the advances that are paid for artists are extortionate, and that's a difficult thing for me to say because I wear a management and a label hat. So on the management hat, I love it. But on the label side, I question that because I don't think it gives the artists, especially new young artists, time to develop properly, because there's always an accountant meeting, there's always a forecasting meeting. It's usually monthly at a major label. Usually the chairman's involved once every quarter, and if the numbers not looking good, then there's a major, major red line underneath those artists. So.
Got a wonderful image of you as a manager looking at a contract going, this is ridiculous, but
it's fertile ground for us, though, isn't it? And those artists get dropped, and off we come and pick them up and do sensible deals with them. And in a lot of cases, these bands have established themselves on the road
and using major label marketing money.
Using major label marketing money. So there is a silver lining to all of that for us, I think, and for the bands. No problem.
Very altruistic.
Well, we're all in this together, aren't we?
It's for you people.
You said it was about the art, and you're donating it down to the people.
I'm going to bring you back to the boring point before John took us on a magical mystery tour. It was about money and how it can affect streaming playlists. Streaming playlists, we know they're growing in influence. We know possibly they're the future over and above albums. Pains me to say it, but we shall see. But can money influence the tracks on those playlists, Fred, and should it?
I don't know that it can, and I also don't know that it should. What should is good music and good marketing. I'm far more interested, in a way, how I'm going to spend my off-platform, by which I mean off Spotify or off streaming service. What am I going to do in Instagram, Facebook, or whatever the relevant channels are where that audience is, that are going to join into that conversation about music in a way that matters to them and point them towards a service like Spotify where they can then sample the wares in a way that then remunerates, so it's kind of, I think, at the heart of it, this whole playlisting thing is a little bit, there's this anxiety in the music business, like, what's the next thing? Fuck, it's not CDs. Okay, it's downloads. Okay, it's streaming. Okay, it's playlists. It's everything, right? It's everything. We've hijacked a shit ton of words from radio, playlist, curation, editorial, all of those things, right? And we've hijacked all of those things because it's like this kind of, in a sense, desperate scrabbling around to find the next big thing. And my question is always, what if there isn't one? What if it's lots of other things that make up how you do this? And is our fixation on data, is our fixation on playlists actually fundamentally an inability, not to sound like a psychoanalyst, but are we transferring the problem that actually are structurally we're faulty? And I don't just mean the majors. We're still siloed in terms of rights. We still don't think holistically about kind of like, if the music industry was funding Facebook, it would have said to young Mark Zuckerberg, here's an advance, £200,000, and we'll own that shit for 50 years. How do you feel about that? And he would have said, I don't know that I'm that interested, thank you. So I think there's a lot of what sits underneath this conversation about marketing is actually a sort of structural and existential question. No question people want to make music, no question people want to consume it. The bit in the middle is the bit that's gotten a bit muddled. So back to sorry, I've gone off on one now, you started it. Is that I think playlists are part of the mix. They're relevant when they're relevant, and they're not when they're not. But certainly I think fixating on how you're going to drive something up a playlist is the same as an unhealthy obsession of whether Radio 1 will play it or not as the be-all and end-all of your campaign. So it depends is my answer on your question.
Well, I started off thinking I had three very digitally savvy mavens to my right, and I thought I'm going to ask them the streaming playlist question. And out of two, that's the answer we've got. So Darren, I'm afraid the spotlight is on you. Streaming playlists. I'll ask the question again. Should you be able to spend money to influence them? Can you spend money to influence them? Or will you in the future be able to spend money to influence them?
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't be spending money to influence them in most respects. It's a bit of a sort of semantic discussion, isn't it? I mean, we pay pluggers to persuade people at radio stations that things are worth it. Whether that, is the blurred line of payola versus just good relationship management. We've experimented with things like playlist plugging, and it was a total waste of time. It just made us realise that actually most of the plays just came from Spotify, and all the third-party ones were a bit of a waste of effort. But I do think that there is a problem at the moment with something of a lockout on the indies. It feels like it's gathering pace. I know Corda Marshall, who obviously we work with at BMG, kicked right off about it last week, or week before, naming names and all sorts, which prompted a very hasty response from certain parties and things like that. It's a complex problem. It's only a real result of just basic capitalism. Everyone seeks power and everyone exploits power. So when power is gained across different power bases, whether it's Spotify's own power to own the editorial space or the various majors to own the biggest playlist brands outside of Spotify's, then they're going to leverage that, and there will always be things happening there. Within that. It just, for me, where the bulk of our clients are independent, it worries me a lot that, it still doesn't feel quite like a level playing field, and that's a concern. But then I'm quietly amused by the fact that Spotify own the whole editorial space. Playlist brands are all jockeying to get attention, and it feels like we're all dancing to the Spotify's beat on this one. Because they own all of it, so they can just sit there and be like, keep building it, just send everyone our way, because we fucking own all of it anyway. It doesn't really matter. So there's nothing but win. And all the majors just keep spending money on building the playlist brands. And I get it. And for any playlist brand, I've done the numbers for clients of ours, and it's like, when you're working at scale, you only need an uptick of 1%. So if you're running a playlist brand, and you're driving a 1% uptick across your whole catalogue, it's worth it. It's paid for it, because you probably employ a couple of people, your outlays couple hundred grand a year, and you might earn another million depending on how many songs you own and you're going to churn there. So I get it, it makes sense, but it's a worry when you have these gatekeepers, and particularly among the indies, there's an element of a lockout, and you're now at this point where the fact that someone like Corda has to call out Spotify and name and shame bands that are on an A-list somewhere and are getting nothing from Spotify.
The DMAs are on the Radio 1 A-list, couldn't go on the Spotify hits playlist.
And funny enough, they're now on quite a few playlists. So it's...
maybe people at Spotify just don't listen to Radio 1.
Yeah, maybe, but it's, there's sort of an element to which you'd almost like it more if Spotify just went, nah. And it just stayed off all the playlists. That's the fact they rolled over and put them on.
That's basically Jeff's tactic is, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work for our audience, or it hasn't set us alight in the committee. Yeah. Very quickly on that point, because I do want to ask if there's any questions from the audience, take a couple, but very quickly, ethically, Jeff is known. In fact, someone said to me when I was first going to interview Jeff, they said, oh, he's the man who can't be influenced. So that's Jeff's reputational standing in the industry. Jeff, what happens when a plugger comes to your office? Do you just think, this is a waste of time because I'll find my own records, thanks very much?
Yeah.
I mean, is that money well spent by the labels? Or?
No, I mean, I always like to stay ahead of pluggers. I like the idea that I know the music before they come in and I know the view about the record. Now, it's not going to work on everything, you know, but I do like to have that feeling of staying ahead. And actually, I have to say, you know, through devices like Spotify and SoundCloud and all those sort of things, you know, I've found myself staying ahead even further with some things, you know. But it's always a delight as well to get somebody to come in whether a plugger or not, who will introduce me to something I've never heard before that I think is great and I know our audience will really enjoy. So it is still worthwhile, but it's. I don't think, just to that point though, I don't think I've actively been plugged by somebody using an example of it's on a particular Spotify playlist though. I've found it myself on a list or something like that, but also I know how those work and how they are influenced and what drives them. The audience isn't given that information really, so they don't really know. But yeah, I would look at those, but nobody's plugged me with that information.
But other stations, I should imagine, they are given a dossier of.
I would imagine with all
on.
the data and Shazam and everything. Yeah.
I reckon we've got time for one or two very quick questions from the audience, if anyone has one. Should we just go with the flow a bit more?
It's interesting. I mean, I've got a friend who shut down his music marketing company, and when I asked why, he just said, I just had a realisation that it made no fucking difference to what happened. And he's quit the music business. He literally just had this wake up of like, means nothing. Doesn't make any odds at all what I do. And like, I've had this, where as an experiment recently, we pulled all marketing spend on a campaign and it sold more. And the existential crisis it invoked in all parties, where we're like, not only has it gone up, it means that like theoretically we're fucking kryptonite to sales, because if we start again, they'll go down. So you know, there's definitely a thing there of, you know, and you do see this. You know, you referenced Adele, and it's like, you know, I remember talking to friends of mine that worked on the Adele campaign, and it was, you know, to some extent it was a similar thing I found on the first Alt J record, where it was like it went out and it was just like a horse and cart running away from you. And all you could do was keep up. It was like the explosion through popular culture, where it just hit that groove and went. I mean, everything you were doing, you know, one could argue. I mean, I'm sure it was all additive, but there was a definite sense of like, if we did nothing, would it still have been a huge success? You know.
I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice there, Dan, because I guess what you're doing when things are happening really well is you're kind of giving things a bit of a tickle as they happen.
Yeah, you're giving it a tickle, but there's a huge momentum there already.
Yeah.
But it's the irony of music marketing, isn't it? The ones you work hardest on, you break your back for, are the fucking failures. Because they're the ones that no one cares about. You're killing yourself to sell it, and it's just not catching fire.
Here's a question on that point for you before we go for our final question. Is marketing the enemy of mystique?
No, because I think there's a definite belief with clients of ours, and particularly Infectious was one of them, around the Alt J campaign, which was, you know, there was a sort of running joke about the sort of, is it Johan Cruyff and the total football thing, where it's like you're playing it without thinking, and it's like a zen-like state. And it was a bit like that with the marketing, where it was like we didn't want to be overtly marketing, but there was a hell of a lot of things going on to try and move things into place so that people felt they were discovering it naturally, when in fact there'd been quite a lot of legwork there. And equally, you know, I've worked on campaigns that definitely touch on what you'd refer to of like grossly over-advertising, and it's just looking at it and going, ugh. Like even we're seeing these ads 5 times a day. It's just horrible, you know. It's not, you're not getting that momentum, and really that's all you're ever trying to do is get the momentum up. And if you can do that very subtly, and there are ways in which you can do that, and it's, you know, it doesn't have to be nefarious or underhand. You know, I just think it's about authenticity, actually, at the risk of rolling out sort of overused buzz terms, in that if you create an authentic connection with these people, then what you're pushing out doesn't feel like marketing, arguably isn't marketing, it's just good stuff happening in the campaign. And perhaps, you know, Run the Jewels are a case in point on that, where it's, you know, the things they're doing, from a Cat remix record to, you know, Killer Mike and Bernie Sanders, all these things, they keep people connected back to the band. And it's very subtle, but it works. And it keeps the record selling, it keeps everyone interested in them, and it actually keeps their cultural currency extremely high. And at the end of the day, as I said, circling back to what I said before, it's kind of like that's all that really matters, is like how much you're occupying a space in popular culture.
And you're being led by the artist.
Often, yeah. I think it's nice if you're led by the artist. I think if you're doing all the work and the artist is sort of somewhere out back, that's usually a sign that it's not as good. It's not there's no right or wrong here. Yeah, it's not ideal. You'd love it to be a close collaboration with artists. Not all of them are like that, and that's absolutely fine. But I think the best campaigns I've certainly been involved with are ones where you feel much more close and the team actually feels smaller and significantly more dynamic as a result.
Very quickly, because I did promise this person at the back she's going to get a question, and she is. But I saw you two fidget a bit when I said the marketing versus mystique thing.
Well, I think so. I think if you're not careful, social media can kill the mystique, actually. And I think we've all seen it with artists where, they seem to feel this pathological need to tell you what they've had for breakfast, what they're having for lunch, where they're going shopping in the afternoon. And I think that's part of the problem nowadays. And I think sometimes at record labels, people, because they want to tick a box and they want you to feel like they've done something, they're saying to you, well, we need to be on Instagram, we need to be in WhatsApp, we need to be on Facebook, we need to be doing X, Y. And actually, a lot of the information you're putting out is rubbish. It's not interesting to people. I think you overdo it. I think, you've got to be very careful about that. I think you've got to apply the brakes sometimes. We sometimes call it just closing the curtains. Sometimes the artists, you've got to close the curtains, disappear, and let people, when they come back with a record or back with something interesting as a tour, perhaps, then that's when people are interested in that, because they've not heard from you for a long time.
Fred?
Yeah, all I was going to say is that I think there is always the risk of oversharing, but the thing is, like I said before, you can't bullshit a bullshitter. So everything that's genuine and originates from a place where it's an extension of the art and the artist has a likelihood of connecting with someone. Everything that is forced doesn't. And the other thing I was going to say is, within Adland, if you look at Cannes Lions and if you look at South by Southwest Interactive, a lot of the conversations that the ad industry is having is about how to make ads that transcend ads and become ideally entertainment and ultimately popular culture. And weirdly, we contribute to the making and disseminating of popular culture. So I think actually we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. Like, a lot of what we do is actually something that, for example, creative shops are trying to do for their inner dishwasher brands. Not that I have it in for dishwashers, but mine is broken.
Universal set up its own advertising agency in conjunction with an HSD Australia today, and they'll be introducing their artists to dishwashers any day soon.
Good luck.
Actually, on that, the Universal ad agency thing, just am I the only person who thinks there's a wide margin for Hollywood accounting on that? You run an ad agency in the middle, you have the label at the top and the bottom line below. It's very easy to run something through an ad agency where you spend a lot of money and, everyone's very well paid. There's probably a healthy... I don't know. Just thinking aloud, putting it out.
I think no one would be shocked if that were to be the case, but I'm certainly not going to say out loud that it is. It is another panel. Well said, Rob. Finally, our question at the back, please. The idea was about network marketing, so people's friends on social networks, etc., and how marketeers, whether it be in the industry or outside, can take advantage of that. Is that the question? Yes. Okay. So obviously that's a area of great future focus. Will be I'm going to come to Gareth on this. Is that people believe what their friends tell them, as has always been the case, more so than they do a billboard poster or even Spotify. How can you best take advantage or gently influence that network effect on social media, but also just in pubs, etc.? It works in real life too.
It's content, which is actually something that possibly a couple of years ago we wouldn't have really been getting involved with. But I think it was mentioned earlier, this thing about you'll talk to different people consume different music in different ways across different parts of the week and so on. And certain things will trigger different people differently. So lots and lots of different content, and where you place it and what you place, and then how that then resonates out is just becoming more and more part of what we do.
We are over time, so thanks for sitting comfortably. Everyone can go and get a drink now, but that just leaves me to thank our panellists, John, Fred, Darren, Rob, Gareth and Jeff. Thanks for listening.
Grim obsession. We weren't told
I don't want to change the world. I'm not looking for New England. I'm just looking for another girl.